I will talk today about thematic philately and give you some guidelines on how to prepare a thematic philately exhibit. So the essentials are a thematic exhibit has two properties. First, it describes a story, and remember that it must be a story. And the story, you illustrate it with appropriate philatelic material in its postal aspects, and we'll come back to this, what postal aspects means. Now, if you want to have a competitive exhibit at FIP level, you have to abide to some rules and guidelines. And I've heard people saying that thematic philately has too many rules, is too complicated. But in fact, the rules are only 5. The concept is shown by the exhibit. That means the story that you put up and you want to share with the viewers and with the exhibitor, people coming to the exhibit. And it has to be your innovative approach and work. Then, how to illustrate the story? By choosing the material. And we have 3 criteria of choosing the material. First is the philatelic criteria. That means the material has to show postal aspects. No private prints or markings are permitted. We'll come back to this. Then the choice of material is taken also with the thematic criteria. That means the material must be linked to the theme or to your development or to your story. The final aspect criteria in the choice of material is the philatelic one, which means philatelic variety, quality, and of course, possibly rarity. So a wide presentations of the best quality and possibly rare material. And finally, but not least, but not the last, presentation of the exhibit. It has to be understandable, easy understandable, nice looking, clearly presented, and nicely arranged. So, some stamps with some catalog listing below them. There is no story. This looks like an old topical exhibit or a motif exhibit. It's not thematic. Now this is another example. Now you have some variety of material, alas, only from the same country. There is some description, but the story is really minimal. So if we come to material, which is the essential thing that you need to make up and to illustrate your story, is that there should be as much variety as possible, both within the whole exhibit and on the single sheet. So the variety must be in the type of material. You have to use stamps, cancellations, postal stationery, covers, proofs, and so on and so on. Don't use only stamps and cancellation, for example. The variety must be spatial. You have to have, if possible, material from all over the world, and temporal, material from all periods, from pre-philately to modern philately. Now, I talked about appropriate material. What does that mean? The thematic and the philatelic material that you use has to be used in its postal aspects. That means the guidelines say that the material is that for which, for the purpose of transmitting mail or other postal communications, has been issued, intended for issue, or produced in the preparation for issue, used or treated as valid for postage by postal agency and so on. I will show you briefly some examples of material you can use, which are stamps, meter marks, booklets, postal stationery, a variety of them. Postal history items, very difficult to find, but very good in the exhibit. Machine cancellations, perfings, watermarks, you can use all these aspects. Of course, die proofs of different kind, meter mark archive cards, proofs also of issued postal stationery or postal stationery variety, multiple franking with correct postage, which is very nice to be shown. So a lot of material, but I would stress, and that was Jonas Hellström contribution, that thematic philately has three main pillars: the traditional, the postal history, and the postal stationery. That does not mean that you cannot use other type of philately class material, but with much more care. You cannot use non-postal aspects of philatelic material. Typically, postal stationery with added private print, the so-called repiquage, FDCs, the illustrations on them, revenues with some exceptions, but private decorations on covers and cards, picture postcards, unless they are postal stationery, private vignettes, area philatelic, private cancellations, contents of letters, postcards, text and drawings, and so on and so on. The new guidelines that hopefully will be adopted at the next Congress will give you some permission to use some of these, but that will come maybe next year. So an example of non-postal aspects, a cover which on the left side you can read Skopje and the date of an earthquake. And this is a privately printed cover as a support to the victims of the earthquake. You cannot use this in an earthquake-related topic. These are two examples of private prints from Belgium. Nice motorist, nice tire, but this is private printed. And this is also from an ACFA photo shop that shows films that you cannot use because it's a private print. Then there is some borderline material, typically some of the repiquage, that means private prints on official, let's say, here is an example of postal stationery, postcards. You can use them, but if no other means of representing a thematic detail are available. And this is just an example on some white powder killing white ants. It's a very difficult topic. But in this case, when you use it, you should really philatelically justify it. That means you have to say that this is privately printed possibly from who did the prints, and so on and so on. Then there is inappropriate material that is still to be seen in some exhibits, like the French gravures. Here we have two examples, or deluxe proofs, or some Belgian souvenir sheets. These are items that should not be used. So we'll go just briefly through all the criteria that are being judged when a judge looks at your exhibit. And there are the usual ones: big treatment, which is subdivided into title and plan, development, innovation. Then there is knowledge, personal study and research, which in thematic philately is divided into the thematic knowledge and the philatelic knowledge. We'll go through this later on. And finally, the usual condition and rarity of the material and presentation. Now let's start with treatment. This is a very important slide. It says that the treatment is divided into title 1, the plan page with the storyline, and then the storyline as developed that means the development, on the single sheets. So these are the components of treatment, and that means we'll go one by one through them. Title. As said before, it's the concept of the exhibit. It tells what is your story, what you want to tell to the viewer. Any theme can be illustrated with philatelic material. And if the theme is too wide, it's difficult to prepare an original exhibit. So you have to narrow the theme. For example, not archaeology, but let's say archaeological jewels of Egypt. Not Olympic Games, too wide. Just athletics, or better, runs, throws, and jumps. Look for innovative titles and innovative themes, like rubbish in daily life, or the history of taste. These are very innovative and very good titles for a topic. Now the plan should be efficient and well structured. And the basic requirements, these basic requirements are the ones that will lead you up to a Vermeil level, are the presence of the introductory page with the plan. The plan and the title must be consistent, and the plan has to be adequate. That means it's sufficient for understanding the structure. And very important, the title and the plan that are consistent must cover all the main aspects necessary to develop the theme. Now, if you want to go beyond that to a higher level, you'll have to have a correct, logical, and balanced structure. And the guidelines say this is assessed up to the degree to which a story is told, and not a list of various aspects, like an enumeration. Now here is one example, mountains and mountain peaks. And this is the plan. And you can read Mount Everest stamps and other record and expedition cover. A series of mountains, stamps, card, maxi card, aerogram, and cover. I mean, you don't talk about philately in the plan. The plan is a thematic plan. All the philately you will show with your material. I made these up, Mountains in Philately, as a bad title and a bad plan, which is an enumeration, unbalanced and not logical. Why? Mountains in Philately, drop Philately, we are in a philatelic exhibition. Mountains doesn't say much, but okay, here there is an enumeration. Alps are very detailed. And then you get mountains in Europe, other mountain change. Please don't use other something in your plan. It means that all the rubbish you have is thrown in that chapter. Mountains in Asia, okay, and you have mountains on islands, okay. You know, we don't have islands only in Asia. Mountains in the rest of the world, North America, South America, New Zealand, I mean, doesn't fit in, huh? You would expect Oceania. And then mountains on Antarctica. Well, Antarctica is the rest of the world or not? And you treat mountain expeditions, so bad plan. There is another example, Lord Buddha and Buddhism. There is this introduction, which is too much text with a few stamps. Nobody will read that. So all of these should go on the sheets, into the development. And also here, you have just an enumeration. For example, Buddhist culture, Buddhist art and paintings, which is culture, of course, Buddhist festival, Buddhist flag and symbols and so on. Nothing is said about the story you would like to tell the viewer. Another bad one, seashells, diversity of shapes, pear shape, spindle shape, and so on. And then the families. And then at the end, food, adornment, and musical instrument. Not good. Okay, I don't want to promote my exhibit, but this is, I think, one plan that is a story, and you can read it as a story. I will go from first part, the story from man's first timid approaches into the realm of mountains. Mountains are much older than man, but at first fear prevented man from ascending them, although later on, man was forced to approach them. So he started to know them better, and their beauty stirring his imagination, so he approached them for pleasure. And this is the start of mountaineering. So you see that you are telling a story in your plan. This is another good plan, the family life of birds. And this is a nice example that you don't just say birds, all aspects. This is just the family life and the beginnings where the parents make the nest and how the nest is built and the eggs laid and the offsprings. And in each part, you can read a nice story. So once the title and plan are fixed, you go to the development. And the basic requirements are elaboration of all aspects of the plan, all the subtitles and the chapters that you showed must be covered. You have to correctly place, order, and position the items on the page in conformity, not only to the plan, which is easy, but to the story being told. And you have to choose the items that have good connections with the thematic text. This is very, very important and not a point which is not very well looked after. Further requirements, you should have a perfect connection between items and the thematic text. And then you should have a depth in the treatment, in the development, shown by links, cross-correlations, structures, causes, and effects. That means, an example, you're talking about the development of toads. You don't just show toads, but you cross-correlate and say, I mean, toads will grow in number if there will be plenty of food and few enemies, but they will shrink if there will be not so much food and a lot of enemies. Now, the development, as I told you, goes chapter by chapter as promised in the plan. So this has to appear on the sheets. But the storyline, we also call it the red thread. You'll see the red lines, should read from top to bottom. And this will tell you that the development is nice because these items are linked to the text near to them. Examples. This is an Indian, I borrowed this sheets. And you can see here you have just a small thematic text at top and many stamps without any explanation. So the development is no good. On the larger side, you can see that there is nice, every item is accompanied by a text, but there is no storyline. Each item, each text is treating only this one. This text is treating this stamp. So there is no connection flowing across the page. An example of how you can do it is, for example, building roads and allowing easier access into mountains. And you say, okay, most of the roads over the mountains passes were built during 1810 and 30 in the Alps. And the harsh terrain involves also the building of many bridges, so that public transport coaches and later buses allows a rapid access to mountains. And then you go on, roads are closed due to better weather conditions, and so on and so on. So the text talking about the buses should be near the item. This is another example on subsistence motivations for going into mountains. To survive, many poor men living in mountain valleys were forced to become poachers or smugglers, and they hunted chamois bucks, and so on and so on. Legends arose. Now here is another example from a chapter on Buddha and his life. And you cannot see it, but it talks, of course, on Siddhartha's life. as a prince that escaped on a horse the luxurious palace and saw human misery, sick people, beggars, and so on. And it's a very nice story, but what you see are only items depicting Buddha. I mean, I cannot see the horse. I cannot see, on the other hand, the misery, some beggar or sick people. That will fit into much better on the page and will make it more interesting. Innovation. Innovation is demonstrated by your personal elaboration, or if you want, your original story that you would like to talk on in your exhibit, and can be seen as the introduction of new themes for your topic, new approaches for known themes, an original story, new chapters or paragraphs, that will detail new aspects of a known theme, or new thematic application of material. Just very briefly, a few examples. New themes for my exhibit, for example, the construction of cable cars. What has that to do with mountaineering? Yeah, because cable cars allowed more rapid access to mountains. Or mountaineering journals. They were used to publicize the ascents so that they invited more and more people to the mountains. Very important. Or new chapters like the origin of mountains, and I use plate tectonics from my profession, or limits to climbing, because if you find that birds are nesting in some steep walls, I mean, climbing should not be done in that period of the year. Let's move over on thematic knowledge. And the components are, of course, you have to very well know the chosen theme, both in general, but also in detail. You have to know the available philatelic material on the market, or find out some which nobody knows about it for that theme. You have to have a background knowledge of the material, for example, regarding its design or the reasons for the issue, and so on. And last, the knowledge of the specific importance of the philatelic items, which are the items seen as key pieces by the community of collectors of that field. Again, basic requirements are the appropriateness, conciseness, and correctness of thematic text. So the text must be correct, appropriate, but also concise. Correct thematic use of the material, of course. Now, if you want to score better on your medal level, presence of new thematic findings for the theme, use of material that has a thematic qualification which is not immediately obvious and needs to be discovered by the exhibitor. One example was the horse in that Buddha Siddhartha exhibit. You don't expect a horse in a Buddha exhibit, but then you know why it is there. Now here are two examples of no text, no thematic text, or too little text. No good. Denotes poor thematic knowledge. I mean, there is no story. You don't have a thematic knowledge of what you want to show. And now this is the opposite. Too much text. We said text must be concise. Too much text means, first it distracts the attention from the material, which is no good. And then it talks about things that are not illustrated on the page, which is even worse. Thematic knowledge is also to have correct descriptions. This is an item from Slovenia, a very old Neanderthal pipe from a piece of bone. And they say it was found in Germany. No, it was not in Germany, it was in Slovenia, sorry. So this is thematic knowledge. One example from my exhibit. The Incas of Peru were sacrificing small girls and boys on top of the mountains, up to 6,000 meters high. For those times, incredible heights. And I use that to illustrate the story with a small girl, but the stamp is also a church And there were no church in Inca times, so this is not a very good example. Moreover, looking at the stamp depicts a girl from a Chipaya tribe that comes from the plains and not from the mountains. So I replaced that with an example which shows a mummy of a girl found on the top of the mountain, which is perfect. Now, surprising material, that means a material which has the thematic qualifications, but it has to be discovered by the author. That means I tried to describe mountain sickness, Mountain sickness, how you describe it philatelically. So I found two constellations, one from Dolores town and one from Altura town in Texas. And Dolores in Spanish means pain and Altura means height. So it's perfect to describe mountain sickness. Let's move to philatelic knowledge. Now the basic requirements are comply with the rules of postal philately. So that means no cut stamps or cut postal stationery, improper maximum cards, things that you would not show in any class. Then the postal documents have to be appropriate. That means, we talked about that, items of real philatelic significance. If borderline items have to be justified. You have to put a philatelic text when required, not for under any simple postal stationery you put the text. No, the philatelic text is used to describe unusual, rare, postal history especially, and of course borderline items. And philatelic knowledge means also the presence of the widest possible range of material and its balanced use. Balanced use means you cannot show 30 or 40 proofs in your exhibit. Too much, too many. And if they are from France, it's even worse. Too many, maybe 10, or that will do. Further requirements, presence of philatelic studies and related skillful use of important philatelic material. And I'll explain this. First, variety of material. So you'll see on this page, different material from blocks, booklets, cancellations, stamps, proofs, machine cancellations, and postal stationery. Use of postal history items, if you can find them, are very, very welcome. Because, for example, these items is an item I use to say that the gods dwelt on Mount Olympus in Greece. And this comes from Olympic Indian territories. So this is a postmaster annotation and pen cancellation of the postal stationery. Probably is unique. You describe, and here is an example, your philatelic study. You describe unusual and rare items. And these are color proofs of the Sweden 1929 issue. So you can enhance some important aspects with variety, die proofs of stamps, like here I have proofs on banknotes or die proof in black and so on. Here is one with Indian stamps, and this is the conquest of Mount Everest, an important point in the history of mountaineering, as you understand, and that deserves a philatelic study. So I use the India issue with the essays in different colors, with the error in colors, and so on, and their use of the stamps. Then what means skillful thematic use of philatelic elements? Two examples. Here I use this composite proof on thin paper that describes some mountains, but this is only the frame around the stamp. So the interior is white. And I use it to say, if you go into the mountains and the fog starts and you go on a glacier, you see nothing but white. And you can just imagine the mountains where you have to go. Or this other example with a vertical perforation, I use it to describe it because on the Fitzroy, which is this mountain in Argentina, Lionel Terray and Guido Magnone used just to put one python after the other in the wall and use that with an artificial climbing. So this clearly describes the holes of the pythons that were used to go up to the top of the mountain. Some other examples from other, not mine, exhibits. This is a nice one, you can see it very well, but you see penny blacks. And the penny blacks, as you well know, have two numbers in the bottom corners. And the author used it to describe the DNA chains, because DNA chains are denominated with letters like TA or CG, GC, and so on, the bonds. And he uses the right letters to describe this DNA. This is a nice example with misperforation. If you want to describe a sinking ship, here you have it. This is also nice. Talk about love, but sometimes love leads to a broken heart. This is a perforation shift error, which perfectly tells you the broken heart, and so on. Just a few things about the rarity. Now, rarity depends, of course, as you know, on the difficulty to achieve an item, and that is called availability. But it also depends on the general demand for this item in philately, and that is more called importance. And for example, of this letter point, you just think of the well-known stamps with the basil pigeon. It's a very, very much sought after item, but it's not rare because there are thousands of them and there are even hundreds on cover. So be careful that do not put items, rare items, in your exhibit which do not have a good relationship to the theme. It can be a very subtle relation, but it's no good, should not be included. Also, if you put borderline items, which are rare, they do not count in the evaluation of rarity because they are borderline. Now, the degree of importance of philatelic material means that, of course, stamps are the things that it's most easily to find. Then becomes postal stationery or booklets. It's not so easy. More difficult are cancellations or telegrams or multiple frankings with correct postage. Then come artist sketches. Sorry about that. Artist sketches and examples of printing process, dye proofs, color proofs, and so on, stage proofs. And the most difficult, of course, are to find items from postal history that will fit in your story. Now, rarity can be also seen in terms of importance. This is not in the guidelines, but of course, we all know that a general importance is seen as the significance for philately or postal service per se. In other terms, these items are significant subjects of general importance for philately. But be careful that not every theme allows for including such material. Then we have specific importance, and that is the significance of an item for the subject. Hence, important items are those which are the key items of a subject. Example of a world important material, of course, if you have a topic on birds or more or better on swans, this is a perfect example. It's a die proof for the first stamp printed locally in Western Australia. You should have it even if I don't collect birds. Then we have the specific importance, which are key items for exhibits, specific exhibits. Like for bicycle exhibits, there were some labels that were postally authorized for bicycles going from routes going from San Francisco to Fresno and backwards, and mail was carried on bicycles. And this is another one for scouting exhibits, is the so-called Mafeking issue that is very important because it's the birth of scouting. For military themes, of course, you can have the Latvia stamps printed on the back of military post maps, military maps. Okay, maybe I'll just skip that, but well, very shortly. So the most essays and proofs of the most classic stamps are the rarest items you can find. Then the high importance are the accepted drawings and essays of the die-proof for controlling engraving process. Then come rejected stamp drawings or color and plate proofs for the production process, presentation sheets, cards for asking final approval, and similar. And of lesser importance are preliminary drawings of accepted designs or color proofs for philatelies, the modern color separations. And as we talked, the rejected designs, drawings are not important. Perforated stamps from French countries or modern specimen stamps are not important. Condition, well, common material must be in top condition, and it is a prerequisite in the guidelines. That means if you have material, common material, modern stamps, they must be in top condition. Rare material, since not easily available, may vary in condition. So the best condition you can achieve is when an exhibit shows many top rarities and all of them are in their best possible condition. Just an example, an old sheet of mine, okay, I'm all ready. This is in a poor condition, stained and so on, not even sent. And I substitute it with this other one, which is traveled, which is peculiar. It has 2 red Maltese crosses, which was against the regulations to have 2 of them on the cover. And last is the presentation. We'll not show you example, but you have seen it in the examples I showed you up to now. The criteria mentioned are clarity of display, clarity of text, and the overall aesthetic balance of the exhibit. Now, a few hints that you might use. Use white or very light colored paper. Don't use colored paper. Do not use, or possibly do not use black Hewitts, because if a stamp moves, the margins will be irregular. Do not frame the page with extra lines. So leave it wide, so use the space, but don't overcrowd the page. Use blank spaces only for highlighting rarities or items you would like to attract the attention of the viewer. And all pages should have the same template. And at the end, I will just show you some examples of improvements in the evolutions of my exhibit. Okay, this is about national parks, that one should preserve the mountain environments. Too many items, same type. So I was able to find a nice stage die proof from the Czechoslovak Republic at that time. And see, I leave some white space at the border to attract the attention. Development is nice, but I have items here on the A4 page which are too crowded, so the material that you have requires more space. And here is an example of a wider, more or less square page, where the material is much nicerly fitted, developed with the storyline flowing across the page to the bottom. This was a rather weak page, 4 stamps and 3 postal stationery, and the postal stationery are all in red, so not very nice. And I substituted with another postal stationery, and this is from Postal History, an example, which is very nice. I found out this die proof, stage die proof of a Czechoslovak stamp, and so the page looks much nicer. Another example, maybe too many stamps, so you have to put a bigger item, and I found one of these archive of the meter marks, which fits in perfectly, and now the page is much nicer looking. Also here, we have just normal postal stationery, nothing special, cancellation with glaciers. But I found already, you know, these two, let's say, proofs of the stationery, Swedish stationery. I have another photo essay here from the Falklands. So now the page is much nicer. Another example, you have a nice story running across, but maybe too many stamps. So put again cancellation, put another die proof of a French stamp, and that will enhance the quality of your, not only this sheet, but if you do this on most of your sheets of your whole exhibit. Another one, this is another poor condition. You can see it's stained card. So I'm still looking for a nice one, scent, but I decided to use a clean one instead. And of course, finding some stage proof examples of a stamp with an observatory on top makes the page nice. So this is more or less my presentation.